In the world of business, there are two types of roles: those who manage data and technology, and those who manage dollars. Both perspectives are essential, but are often at odds. This is where techs and execs come together on common ground. This is Dollars and Data.
Welcome to Dollars and Data, a video series for techs and execs. I'm Laura Noland, your host for today's conversation about how to bring technical teams and C-suites together to fight ransomware. So today we'll discuss PPR, which stands for Proactive, Preventative, Recoverable. It's NFINIT's modern comprehensive approach for combating ransomware and other cybersecurity threats. We're joined by Denis Savage, Vice President of Operations at NFINIT, and Jeremy Fitzpatrick, NFINIT's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thank you, Laura. Good to be here.
Well, Denis is handling the technical side of the coin, while Jeremy speaks to the executive point of view. So let's jump right in. Given the rise in ransomware cases throughout the pandemic, with a few of history's largest, most costly, and most brutal attacks making the headlines, from Scripps to Colonial Pipeline to Recoverable, we know that every CEO, COO, and CFO, they're asking the same question: are we protected? So how would you say the boardroom conversation on cybersecurity has changed?
Well, hopefully everybody saw Zoom's $85 million settlement that came out on July 31st. That should put some companies on notice to the potential of liability. Equifax, Home Depot, Uber have paid more for their breaches. That penalty will surely get the attention of boards. This is the beginning of the process and definitely not the end. Previously, security was an add-on to a current business's service stack. Now the focus is turning to building applications and environments with security in mind from the beginning. This shift has started with board members asking questions they previously didn't even know to ask. So in years past, IT teams would sort of assail the board with the need to improve their cybersecurity posture. Without a return on investment, some of these initiatives were turned down. Now the board is listening, since the ROI has a direct impact on a business's reputation, on the ability to stay online, on the ability to recover in the event of a breach. That transformation has allowed for security to have its own budget to pull from, as the focus on risk allows a company to justify its ROI, and businesses are more keenly aware of the challenges faced through ransomware.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that's happening is the conversations are now being had in the boardroom. I think before it was more of a checklist of just making sure that the liability, the minimum, was being done to avoid liability around data breaches and access to data. I think now it's become much more, there's ownership at the boardroom level. There's ownership with all of the different, the CFO, the CEO, that they didn't really have visibility into it before. They would look at the CIO and say, "You're good, right? You have everything you need. What do we need to do?" I think now we're looking at it where there's much more of a conversation and go back to kind of understanding the impact on the business. So should we lose this system? What happens? And having these table-based, table talk conversations where you're going around and saying, okay, let's ask this department right now, they lose this system. What do they do day one? What is the impact to the business? I mean, in the case of healthcare, if you're going back to paper records and trying to move data through paper, what is the impact on the organization, and how long can you sustain it without having multiple different types of compliance violations and impacting patient health? So there's a whole lot more that has really been exposed around not just the minimum required protections in place, to really understanding that the data is the life of the business, and the impact not just from a productivity and from a data loss standpoint, but from reputation is become a forefront in these conversations. So I think that the more that people are doing these tabletop exercises and being able to run through the scenarios and walk through, if this, then that, it's really helping to create more awareness and understanding of what the total impact is.
With the warp speed shift to remote work at the beginning of the pandemic, cybersecurity has been one of the top business talking points over the past year and a half. What are a few things that every company should know about how to improve their data privacy and cybersecurity approach?
I think it starts with creating a company culture that puts security at the forefront, Laura. This should include constant training and testing of your user base, as well as hardening guides for servers, firewalls that allow access only to the services that require it. Users that we know are generally the weakest link of the organization. So clicking on a nefarious link is still the easiest way to breach an organization and into a company. That means that things such as phish threat campaigns against your user base can really help train employees. In addition, it only takes building one server incorrectly without the necessary security features to bring about a compromise. So every system and every application should be built with security in mind first. A couple other things just to keep in mind is, from a company standpoint, you need to perform a risk assessment. A risk assessment is a complete view of everything surrounding your IT presence and the holes that potentially exist. Once we identify those risks, they should be categorized to remediate, or if you're a business that allows for a certain level of risk, then you can at least notate it and know where those things exist. This can go a long way towards closing attack vectors. The other thing is we have to expand our horizons from thinking that security is based on perimeter only. This is an old school mentality that can get you in trouble. Security is comprehensive, should extend from your firewalls down to your servers, to your applications, to your people. This means building, again, hardened servers, using only required services that are necessary, disabling unused services, installing antivirus software on all machines, and routinely running scans against your environment to ensure there are no new vulnerabilities. Going further beyond that, we need to create immutable backups. Immutable backups cannot be changed or modified by an external source. Ransomware in itself relies on the ability to change things on the fly. So having these things in place, again, this is a starting point, will help us tremendously in mitigating our risk. Along with that, we need to develop policies and procedures around our security and compliance. There should be guidelines that we have on how we offboard employees, how we onboard them, how we build servers, what security is built into applications, and the steps we need to take if a breach is identified. Again, not a comprehensive list by any means, but there are so many factors that go into it. You have to begin the process before you can perfect it.
And what about the executive perspective? Jeremy?
Excellent. Dennis has a very comprehensive answer and a great, very high-level view of all the different components involved. I think one of the things that you said that's very impactful is it's a people problem. The person is our weakest link, and when we start looking at it and we look at a culture of security awareness, that takes you out of the IT department and puts you into the business as a whole. So one of the challenges is looking at this not as an IT problem and an IT issue, but really understanding that this has to be something that all people in the organization, from leadership, top executive leadership down, have to be conscious of, supporting, and understanding. To that point, IT folks, they see data. They see ones and zeros, they see boxes, they see VMs, they see names. Understanding the value of that data and the risk of that data being compromised is something that they don't always have knowledge of. They don't know if there's PCI information in there, if there's any type of HIPAA-related documentation and information in some of the different data that they're storing and protecting and granting access to. So making sure that the business thoroughly communicates that and understands where and when to put the right resources in place to protect that especially high-value data.
Since we'll be discussing PPR today, could you set the stage and let us know your definition of PPR?
Certainly. I will first preface it by saying any company out there who thinks that they can be 100% secure is a little bit misguided. So what we try to do here and with our customers in our conversations is try to make sure that there's a balance between the risk and the investment. And PPR is a comprehensive strategy that looks at all the different elements involved. So the first P is the proactive, and that's saying, how do I get out in front of this? Where is my front line of defense? My front line of defense, once again, goes back to the people. I'll always say that you can't manage what you can't measure. So in the proactive approach here, what we really want to do is we want to build out a training protocol that will go out throughout the organization to make employees at every level aware of what is actually happening out there. So being able to socialize the breaches that are in the news and understand why and how they happened. We use Sophos Fish Threat to be able to test our population to make sure that, okay, these are the types of phishing attempts that you're going to see. And we get pretty creative, and there's a great library there that allows us to start a good starting point. But we want to see not just at the individual level, but the department level to understand if there's trends. Is there certain departments that are a little more click happy than they should be, and how do we create additional training and learning opportunities for the folks that are routinely not as savvy on what they're clicking on and where they're going to. So the proactive is really about just creating a balance where you can say, okay, here's where our organization's at today, and here's the milestones we're going to put in place to make sure that this is front of mind of every employee, and we're doing the right type of password maintenance and protection. We're doing the right type of email hygiene and understanding what we're looking at and what we're clicking on, and just really building that front layer of defense out. The next one is preventative, and this is the one where most companies are actually probably the most engaged and the most traditionally invested. It's a perimeter, creating that secure perimeter. Challenge is, these days, there is not a distinct perimeter. Going back to the work from home, we're now stretching application access to residential networks that are very unsecure in nature. When you have my network at home, you look at my Euro and you'll see that I've got 15 light switches that are on my network, and I've got refrigerators reporting data. I've got all of these different things that are not routinely patched or accessible by the company to protect are now new attack vectors that now are on a network that has access to systems. So the perimeter has changed, so you can't look at it just as a perimeter anymore. However, the basics that Dennis started off with, making sure you have antivirus on every endpoint that has access to your network so that you can stop any type of malicious software, or at least recognize it sooner than later. Making sure that you have the proper new age firewalling techniques in place. Secondarily, looking at micro-segmentation of your network, making sure that financial employees have access to financial applications, and making sure that just because if one of their credentials are exposed and compromised, they don't have access to the rest of the systems on the network by the network definition itself. So creating these different segmented areas allows you to minimize what the exposure could be should you have a breach. On top of that, looking at tools like SIEM and being able to do event logging and have all of these things running inside of that perimeter to make sure that you're doing everything you can to posture and to understand and catch malicious behavior before it spreads. And then the R, when all else fails, you got to plan on recovery. And this is, I think most businesses have invested in some form of backups. However, I will challenge most companies that they are not actually testing and validating in routine process enough to know that they can recover should they have issues. And then on top of that, as things are becoming more sophisticated in the attack, as Dennis mentioned before, creating that immutable copy, creating an air gap between data sets, creating the ability so that you can recover and and understand what your path to recovery is should your first two stages fail and you get compromised.
Which of the three, proactive, preventative, or recoverable, is most overlooked?
So it's interesting what Jeremy noted before about the preventative step, because from a technical perspective, the answer is still preventative. And the reason is because this sort of gets overlooked because companies look and say, I have a level of security. Whether that level is sufficient is a different question. So as I mentioned earlier, the old guard of security was take care of the perimeter, you're golden. That is not the case. Preventative is a cumulative approach. It starts with risk assessment to identify those areas of weakness. It takes into account the human element that carries the most amount of risk. It recognizes that we're in the BYOD segment, especially in that remote work era, which introduces new potential attack vectors. So policies and procedures, such as password length and complexity and least privileged access, are created and adhered to is just as vital as segmenting networks, ensuring that cross-contamination cannot take place, and in the event of the breach, we've minimized it as much as possible. From there, we have IT teams who can pinpoint the right tools to perform the task of preventative security and apply them to all facets of the business that limit access to that critical information. So it's interesting that most companies have probably put the most into preventative, but that's probably why they overlook it as a result, because they're not looking. I already put money there. It's good, but it's probably not good enough.
I 100% understand what you're saying, Dennis. I feel that in my conversations with customers, the most overlooked is the hardest one to achieve, and that's the proactive and a culture of security awareness. A lot of companies are actually using these new cycles to educate their employees, but most of them don't have the tools in place to actually benchmark and create a baseline for security awareness and then be able to routinely check back up on that. So I would say that that's the most underdeveloped of all the different areas for the PPR strategy. However, on top of that, back to the recoverable side, I think that there's a lot of blind faith going on in that world of, yeah, we're good, we're doing backups, but there's not that trust but validate nature. That trust but validate nature is imperative for an IT organization to understand, yes, we have the right process in place, and here's how we expect these things to happen. Because I think one thing in IT is change, as consistent as can be. And your systems are changing, your tools are changing, your people are changing. How do you keep up and maintain a good validation of, yes, this will work when all of those things are changing constantly?
Sounds like we settled that all three are overlooked. That's what I heard.
I will agree with that.
PPR seems like a giant undertaking. Where do you recommend that businesses start, and how can they get the IT team and business side of the house taking action together?
I think each business needs to determine their own level of comfort in the PPR lifecycle. Every business has its own distinct needs. As an entity that has seen all sides, having a plan for each of these components is vital. If you're not proactive in your approach, you leave your business vulnerable to attack. Taking preventative steps can limit your attack surface. If an attacker wants in badly enough, honestly, they're going to find a way. So being able to safely recover is that vital step in the process. These three items work together and build upon each other. It is important that we're having the conversations we are today that lend credence to this. And the conversations need to be with egos put to the side to ensure that the truth is being portrayed, because hiding something now, it's going to come back and bite you.
Definitely. Yeah, I think from a business standpoint, once again, it goes back to understanding the business value. So creating a risk assessment around the most critical data systems, understanding a BIA, a business impact analysis. If this goes down, what is my impact? What other dependencies do I have on this? Am I in manufacturing and I'm running 3 shifts, and all of a sudden I lose my ERP system because it's compromised, and I now have 3 groups of labor that I'm paying to stand around on the floor? And do I have agreements with my retailers or my downstream suppliers that I have to meet these SLAs that I'm now going to miss, that's going to have another business impact on me that is not predictable nor known to your IT department? Should I not be able to ship this on time? All of a sudden I'm having penalties that are contractual that are a major hamstring to the business. So there's lots of different elements there. I think looking at it very granularly and looking at it based on each department and their function and what applications they rely on most, and then grading out the criticality of those applications, and then starting with the most critical and working your way down. That it's a very methodical process, but there needs to be an understanding of the holistic business approach, and then apply the right IT resources to that approach.
Obviously, recovery of data applications and operations is the ultimate goal of PPR. What are some of the unexpected and financial ramifications of this process?
So there's no way to put every company into the same box. Each business needs to determine their acceptable level of risk across the organization, asking the tough questions, as Jeremy mentioned, around the impact of the business, and looking at various levels of compromise will assist in developing a plan that works for that business. What we can say is that every company needs to factor into a cybersecurity budget. That should include constant training and a security posture that includes firewalls, antivirus, and backups. Smaller companies would likely benefit from outsourcing tasks to an external vendor. Will there be cash outlay to begin the process? Yes. Will it be cheaper to do it and be prepared rather than waiting for a catastrophe? Absolutely.
Yeah, I can definitely echo Denis's thoughts there, but I would also add having a plan is going to be far more inexpensive in the long run than going at it and being 100% reactive. When you are reactive to a breach or to a successful attack, and you have all of the costs from forensic cybersecurity teams coming in to help determine where and when the attack was successful and how it came in, being able to close that door before you restore the system. Everything that you were doing when it's an emergency, it's like a wedding. It costs 4 times as much. So I would definitely state that having a plan and making sure the plan is executable will definitely allow you to at least keep it within a reasonable budget and understanding what the impact is should something happen. There's so many different things from the cost of your cybersecurity insurance going up if you're not doing the proper things that you could get blindsided on. And even if, let's say, I've heard of stories in the market where you're successfully ransomware, and if you didn't have the right items in place and doing the right things on the checklist to make sure you're not a target, your policy could be null and void, and now your business is at risk.
And there you have it. Thanks for joining us on Dollars and Data. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all of our Dollars and Data episodes. And if you liked this one, please like and share the video. You can also find us online at NFINIT.com. Until next time, keep bridging the IT gap.